Okay, joining us right now, Sean McCarty. Sean, it is great to meet you.
Pleasure to be with you.
Okay, so Executive Vice President, Government Affairs Director at Helena. So what do you do in that role? What does that mean?
So really act as a liaison between Helena and the officials that represent us, the agencies that regulate us. So much of our interaction on a day-to-day basis is, you have a regulator and a regulatee, and it's very transactional. But ag is a smaller and smaller percentage of the population, and so the need to have a voice to advocate not only for Helena but for agricultural communities is probably as important as it ever has been. And so Helena has a government affairs department whose sole responsibility is to try and draw that relationship a little bit tighter.
I always joke that it's not just scotch and golf. There's a lot more to it than that.
There is, although my friends think I'm out on like a yacht and just throwing hundreds in the air, and they've got this idea of what lobbying is, and it's like no, it's a little bit different.
Okay, so from your perspective in your role, right now, what do you, if we were to say, what are you lobbying about, or what are you communicating about on behalf of Helena? What does that look like?
So at the federal level, there's still a lot of emphasis on the Farm Bill. We are in our second extension.
Never-ending story.
No, we've
when
had
we get this one done, we'll start the next one.
That's right. We're going to be halfway through what should have been the new version by the time. So we're already planning on the next version. But so we're advocating for priorities within the Farm Bill. There's a lot of other things going on right now that kind of make it a little hard to have that conversation in too much depth, because we've got to get through budget reconciliation and appointments, and everyone still has a lot of questions about trade and the new administration. So you're lobbying for the future and the certainty that we want. And then there's a multitude of other smaller, more specific, more geographic concerns that you touch on.
A lot of talk here at Commodity Classic about tariffs and trade. Now, a lot of times we talk about it from the farmer's perspective. Will there be a tariff on fertilizer leaving Canada, coming into Canada, machinery? There's a whole, steel and aluminum tariffs are taking up a lot of the oxygen. From your perspective, what are some of the maybe I don't want to put words in your mouth, but how do you look at tariffs as a Helena?
Yeah, so we understand that tariffs are a tool, and when used appropriately can lead to a desired outcome, right? But that is issue to issue, product to product, and unique relationships between countries. I would say that from a trade standpoint, when you meet with members of Congress and you talk to the folks up there in D.C., they are just as concerned with the cost to the grower as what the outcome of the tariff would be, and making sure that we have that whole 360-degree conversation, not just focus on, okay, well, if a tariff achieves expanded markets, that's a win. Okay, maybe. But if it also increases the cost of goods to where that farmer can't afford to stay in business, then did they live to see that benefit? No. So we've got to strike that balance, understanding that if done properly, we get it. But right now, we've had a couple years where the ag economy hasn't been the strongest, and we're really going into a mode of how do we make sure that we manage the rough years so that you can live to see the good years again. And for Helena, as an agricultural solutions provider, our best interest is find a solution. No matter what type of farmer or rancher you are, we're here to provide a solution and navigate the ever-changing world that we live in.
Ever-changing. It's fast. As somebody that's trying to keep on top of it, it's difficult.
Yeah, just don't provide any definite answers. We sit here today and you
as
give an
of
answer,
today.
Yeah, and tomorrow I'll be completely wrong.
Yeah, 1 o'clock Mountain on Monday. Here's what we know this very moment. So one of the things we're hearing a lot about out of this administration, and I've been telling audiences in some of my speeches, it's the EPA and the registration process. So we're hearing a lot about, we need to get products to the market faster. A lot of times in Canada, we have concerns about PMRA, right? And we look at south of the border, we're like, man, it's so much faster. But I keep on hearing complaints here that time to registration to market is getting concerningly long, and maybe EPA is doing its best impersonation of PMRA. What's actually happening? Yeah,
so the timelines have gotten longer. The time it takes to get a new active ingredient registered today is probably somewhere around 12 to 13 years. One of the 1,000 that you submit that actually makes it through all the steps, and it may cost $250 or $300 million. That timeline is stretching out. Not only are new product registrations taking longer, but also just small changes, right? If we want to add a crop to a label or add a new source of a currently existing active ingredient, those used to be in the 2 to 3 month time frame. Now you're looking at 2 to 3 years. So that timeline and moving forward, if you look at the horizon, you go, I don't really see where that timeline is going to shorten. Holding it flat might be a win.
And where that becomes a real concern, it's not in crops like corn or wheat. It's in like pulse crops. It's in sugar beets. It's in smaller crops, canary seed. I don't know. It's in smaller crops that don't have the acreage to entice people to put up with the hassle of time.
That's right.
Okay.
And there's a cost to that, right? And so from EPA standpoint, their staffing is less than it's been. If you look back, if we go back 20 years, they're on the verge of being at about half staffed in the Office of Pesticide Programs at the EPA, which is the division that registers new active ingredients or reviews active ingredients that are on the market for their 15-year review, their life cycle review. That department may end up being at less than 500 FTE, and it was probably 800 or so about 20 years ago. So smaller staff, and we've seen a lot of retirements for a lot of reasons. COVID and a number of other things kind of pushed people out, and they chose to leave, and so the folks that you've replaced them with are just inexperienced. Not their fault. It's just they don't have the institutional knowledge of somebody that's been doing that job, that registration job, knowing where the pitfalls are, how to really speed the process up. That knowledge is gone.
Got another theory for you that I'm concerned about. If it becomes the registration process in Canada, or sorry, in the U.S. becomes thicker, there's more friction, higher bar, and more costly. And it entices companies to maybe, well, we don't want to bring as many products to market. We're going to be a little bit more picky and choosy in terms of how much we flood EPA with more applications. That impacts a country like Canada because if that product isn't getting registered on the corn acre in the U.S., it is surely not coming to the Canadian corn acre of 4 million acres.
No, and that's where we see this also because of litigation, where in various courts we've seen litigation against certain active ingredients or states attempting to ban or restrict the access. Well, you start reducing the volume, and companies look at that and say, okay, at some point the ROI to bring a product to market isn't there. If I spend $300 million and wait all this time to bring it to market, and then I lose 30% of that market because a state bans it or restricts it, or the timeline stretches out longer, okay, now the ROI isn't there. And so to your point, that most of these manufacturers of these materials are not just focused on the United States market. They are global players that are selling these products in Canada and worldwide.
Also concern, I don't want to be all like, I'm not trying to be doomsday. I'm trying to, the audience needs to understand what's happening here behind the scenes. You mentioned the farm, there's less and less, the total percent of the population is less and less from or farming and ranching. That's also true at the political level. Is that becoming more difficult when you walk into a member of Congress and it's like, or a senator's office, and you're like having to explain the ABC's ag?
Yeah, it is. I think we see this in all walks of life, not just agriculture. There is such a hunger and desire for transparency, and we hear that out of the current administration. Is they want to provide transparency. Folks want to know where their food comes from. They want to know what's going on in the production. They want more information than they've ever desired. But they're further away, and at the congressional level, you have very few what I would call true farmers. 435 House members in the United States House. You have 100 senators. There are very few farmers in there, and so you're having these conversations with them or their staff. And even the staff, it's almost a relief when you meet a staff, a legislative aide that works on agriculture that comes from the farm, because you're not starting from square one. You can at least kind of spend that 15 minutes that you have with them digging into the issue, but more and more you're finding yourself trying to explain agriculture at a more basic level, which takes a lot more time to foster that relationship and get the depth of understanding.
I've been really interested in how the different slices of agriculture, dairy, beef, pork, corn and soybeans, whatever, how they're all reacting to RFK and make America healthy again.
Yeah, and who doesn't want to make America healthy, right? I mean, that's the end goal. We all want to be healthy. It's the details. It's taking everything line item by line item and saying, okay, how does this work? How does this work? What's the approach here? FIFRA, the United States' governing statute for pesticide registration, has for so long been viewed as the gold standard of how we assess risk. risk-based science.
Science-based.
That's right. And following that, and we don't want to tear that up. We feel like we got to where we are as a global provider through that. And so we want to be very cautious about any attempt to tear that up without thinking about not only step one, okay, we tear it up and this is the result. Well, what happens step two, step three, step four? What are the downstream consequences?
Is Europe the other side of that? Because I think I sort of feel like Canada floats in the middle of all of that, but Europe seems to be the one where we're trying to avoid.
To a certain extent, sure, but if you look at their elections here recently, in a number of European countries, you've seen these protests. Farmers lining up their tractors, blocking up roadways, standing up for restrictions and things that have happened that have probably hindered their ability to produce or they feel like be competitive. And you've seen the result be in a shift in politics. Now, there's a lot of other things going on over there, but you do witness ag standing up for itself in Europe, too. So I would say that Europe is probably maybe not the polar opposite side of it, but it is definitely one of those things that you hear in comments coming out of the administration of being more like Europe, and they don't do this in Europe. Not using pesticides in Europe, which is not accurate, but that's kind of what's viewed as, okay, maybe we need to be more like them.
When you're doing your lobbying and talking to members of Congress, are you always usually talking about the issues at hand or based on the topic through the lens of the farmer? Because at the end of the day, the farmer's not making money. You're not either.
No, that's right. And for Helena, we exist in rural communities all across the country. And so our issues are their issues. We view ourselves as part of the operation. We make a lot of those decisions at the kitchen counter, sitting with mom, dad, nephews, uncles. We're all in it together. If the farmer does not succeed, then we do not succeed. So some of our policy issues and some of those meetings, we may be talking about pesticides or trade, but sometimes that conversation kind of delves off into just rural investment. How do we make sure that we're protecting our rural communities so that our employees and our customers can exist there, right? Technologies, broadband, healthcare, schools, all these different things that they're rural issues much more than they are just ag issues. And so I think you really try and look at ag as a full spectrum, everything that goes into ag, not just the crop inputs.
Great stuff. Hey, we've been talking to Sean McCarty. He's Executive Vice President, Government Affairs Director at Helena. Sean, it's been great to meet you. Thanks a lot for the conversation.
Sean, you too. Appreciate
Important work, absolutely.